What's up, guys? It's Dr. Tim Jackson with another episode of the Boss Body Podcast. Today, I have a very special guest, Miss Brittany Ford, expert biohacker, who's now teaching a course on preconception care and who is expecting a baby. And when's it your baby due, Brittany?
July.
July. Awesome. That's a great month to be born. That's when I was born.
Uh,
So I think it's the month of greatness. So your child's probably going to rule the world. While I make every effort to broadcast correct information, I'm also still learning. I will double check all my facts, but realize that healthcare is a constantly changing science and art. One doctor or healthcare provider may have a different way of doing things from another. I welcome any comments, suggestions, or correction of errors. I take no money from supplement or device companies. By listening to this podcast or reading this blog, you agree not to use this podcast or blog as medical advice or to treat any medical condition in either yourself or others, including but not limited to patients that you are treating. Consult your healthcare provider for any medical issues that you may be having. This entire disclaimer also applies to any guests or contributors to the podcast or the website. Under no circumstances shall any guests or contributors to the podcast or blog or any employees, associates, or affiliates of the Boss Body podcast be responsible for damages arising from use of the podcast or the blog. This blog or podcast should not be used in any legal capacity whatsoever, including but not limited to establishing the standard of care in a legal sense or as a basis for expert witness testimony. No guarantee is given regarding the accuracy of any statements or opinions made on the podcast or the blog. But welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. And yeah, I hope so. I hope he rules the world. That would be very interesting.
Yeah, I had Dr. Medea Saeed on the show, and her kids have the Healthy Kids podcast, and they interviewed me for that. And I asked her, like, they're like little machines, like 8, 11,
Yeah.
14. And she said, everyone in our family gets along so well because we're all balanced, physiologically, and it just makes things work better. So along that same line,
Love
let's
that.
talk about, well, number one, what brought you to biohacking? And then how easy was it to get your husband on board with biohacking?
Yeah, great question. So I kind of stumbled upon biohacking after I became a nutritionist. And I was super into food and whole foods and supplements and all of these things like that. And one day I kind of just started thinking about lifestyle and all of the other things that make up our health outside of food. And I think I was listening to a podcast actually, and it might have been like Dave Asprey was being interviewed or something. But I stumbled upon biohacking, and when I started to dive deeper into it and understand that it's a very holistic approach to living and to your health, that was when I was like, "Oh, I think this is something that I want to like take part in, and it and makes sense." Like I love being a nutritionist, and I think food is so important, but we still need to look at sleep, environment, exercise, hormones, toxins, like all of these other components. And so then I started getting into biohacking, and now I kind of dabble in all these different areas, and I love it. And my husband has been pretty on board, I would say. It's been like a slow journey, right? So like in the beginning, maybe he was a little more like judgmental, I guess, or like not as much on board. But then when you live with somebody who's so healthy and it kind of just like rubs off on them, and now we have no issues, and he's like super into most of the things that I'm into. So
That's awesome. Yeah, I think it's great that, you guys biohack together, couples that biohack together stay together, right?
yeah.
I mean, when I've worked with, a husband or a wife and then, they're very healthy, but their spouse is not into it, it creates tension, right?
Yeah.
And that's not healthy. But um, did you have health issues, health challenges of your own that you were able to biohack yourself out of?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So my health issues kind of started with gut health issues years ago, and I didn't really even understand that it was gut health issues at the time. I just had these weird symptoms that I couldn't explain. And I went to a naturopath and we started going down this rabbit hole of testing me for parasites and candida overgrowth and leaky gut syndrome and these types of things. And that is like when I really first fell in love with natural health in the beginning. And and then I healed from that and that type of thing. And then eventually, when I got into biohacking, I was having like hormonal issues. My cycle was irregular. I My ovulation was irregular, and so that is kind of really when I started looking more and more into the idea of biohacking and what can I do to kind of support my female health, like female health issues. And at the time, there really wasn't a lot of people actually talking about female health with biohacking. Like even now, if you look at the main biohackers that you could probably name, like how many of them are actually female?
Right.
So it it took me down a rabbit hole. I had to do a lot of research and a lot of work, but I was able to regulate my menstrual cycle, regulate ovulation, um, get everything to a point where I was pretty happy with it before we even started talking about a baby. But it took a lot of work, took a lot of time for sure.
Yeah. And so you work with clients. Do you do mostly group coaching or one-on-one coaching?
It's one-on-one coaching. So it's a lot of like consulting with women who have had similar issues. So things like PCOS, women coming off of birth control after being on birth control for like 10 years. And now moving into this biohacking fertility space, it's a lot of preconception care, fertility. How do I optimize my health before we start to try to conceive?
Right.
But then it's also like older women too who are, let's say, in their 40s, who are like, okay, I'm ready for my baby now. What do I do? And so it's interesting to have these different discussions across the board and really to be able to support women in such a holistic way.
Absolutely. And I think, yeah, like you said, most of the biohackers that we can name, like the household names, are guys. Um, but yourself, the biohacker babes, Kristen Weitzel,
Mhm.
I've had all you guys on the show, and you're making a name for, well, you've had a name for yourself, but you're becoming more and more popular. And so hopefully you'll continue to get more exposure because I think a lot of women just feel disempowered. Like, a lot of their identity is tied to their reproductive ability. And then they get tossed a pamphlet on IVF and told, I'll see you later. And there's really no guidance on sleep or thyroid health. And so let's talk about the thyroid. How is thyroid related to pregnancy?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, obviously, we know the thyroid produces certain hormones, and we need certain like minerals to be able to support it, iodine, things like that. It's part of a complex system and a complex hormonal system, and a lot of women deal with thyroids that are, hypothyroid, hyperthyroid, and there is a lot that we can actually do to support that and take this very holistic approach that we're talking about. So while someone might jump on a thyroid supplement and be like, oh, this is going to help me, this is going to fix me. When women come to me with thyroid issues and they have had their testing done, we can actually assess their levels of T3, T4, reverse T3, reverse T4, TSH, all of these different things. It's what else can we do to support you? Like, let's actually take a 360 approach. And this is kind of what I do with most health issues that come to me actually is let's assess your stress, your sleep, your environment. How's your relationship? How's your movement and your sweating, your exercise going? And then we come up with this very holistic plan that overall makes you healthier, but also targets the thyroid at the same time. So I know that's not a very specific answer, but that's kind of the approach that I've taken with things that I've done and my clients, and it tends to get good results.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I mean, I think, the more toxins we have, especially things like metals, mercury that can target the thyroid, goitrogens, fluoride, all mycotoxins, the thyroid gland is incredibly sensitive to oxidative stress. And so ultimately, anything that increases oxidative stress is going to cause harm to the thyroid. But then we also have to look at the HPA axis because if cortisol is too high or too low, it's going to drag down the thyroid, correct?
Yeah. Yeah, and also, like, gluten as well, like, my husband, he has a very sensitive thyroid, and so I know more about it from his perspective almost because gluten can, displace iodine in the body, and so, I don't force him to be gluten-free or anything like that, but I try to encourage him and explain this, like, simple concept of, like, every time you eat gluten and you're reacting to it, you're making it harder on your thyroid to, you know, function as it should. And
Right.
so even just a simple thing of like reducing the gluten in your diet can support your thyroid in such an easy way.
Yeah, and one thing I've heard a lot in the past is, well, unless you have celiac, you don't need to worry about gluten. Well, that's not true. I mean, you know this, but there's
Yeah.
non-celiac gluten sensitivity, but then
Mhm.
you can react to other parts of the plant as well. And there's the glyphosate issue.
Mhm.
And since I think it's what 60% of T4 is converted to T3 in the gut, or liver. And then the other, another 20% is converted in the gut. And so, if you have a gut issue, it's going to ultimately lead, potentially at least, to a thyroid issue.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah. A lot of people like to think that, but in terms of the gluten and it's not necessary to like fully take it out. But it's like you said, it's not just the gluten, it's what the gluten is in, the bread that is, sprayed with pesticides, herbicides, GMOs, everything like that. It's also inflammatory in the body. It is usually very processed as well. So now you're eating a lot of processed food that's not a whole food. Uh, and like what other nutrients can really be in there that are that beneficial to justify having that much gluten in your diet. So, I mean, I typically try to stay away from gluten and most grains in general because I understand the um, impact on my health beyond just this one gluten molecule that everybody is like so obsessed with.
Yeah. And at the end of the day, there's no such thing as a gluten deficiency, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of people will, get very defensive when I'm like, well, you got to cut out gluten. But I'll tell you, I had a
Yeah.
patient or client like 10 years ago, maybe 11, and she was in Indiana. And when she ate gluten, she sent me a picture. It looked like she was in the second trimester, speaking of pregnancy. But she wasn't pregnant. She went on vacation with her family to Italy, ate gluten, no issue because glyphosate's illegal.
Wow. Yeah. I've heard that from multiple people who say, when they have the croissants in Paris or the pasta in Italy, like there's no bloating, there's way less of a reaction to when they have those same things in North America. So there is something to be said about what's going on there for sure.
Yeah, and in terms, I heard Paul Chek say many, many years ago that, in terms of reproductive, ability and capabilities, nature only wants to produce a human that's stronger and healthier and smarter. And so, the more toxic we are, more stressed we are, nature's not going to allow us to reproduce. Can you touch on
Yeah.
the role of stress in conception?
Yeah. Oh, this is such a good question. It's really hard. It's hard because I think most people know now that more and more people are struggling with fertility. So it's about 1 in 6 couples struggle with fertility challenges now. And there was a recent study done, I think it was in the UK. It was 40% of all women of all ages are concerned about their ability to conceive. So if you're concerned and you haven't even started trying yet, like think about your stress levels going into it without even really starting the journey, right? And so that makes it really difficult. And it doesn't help when we see so much online about people struggling with getting pregnant, IVF, miscarriages. And there's a lot of narrative around the fertility struggles in general. And I think that automatically, well, for me, it did for sure. It automatically made the question of getting pregnant a question. Like I remember before even starting my preconception care, I remember having fear that I wouldn't be able to get pregnant. because of my hormonal issues and a PCOS diagnosis and things like that. And so I already had this fear. Fear creates stress in the body. The body keeps the score, all of these things that people believe. And so I think it's complex. I know obviously like there's the biological side of it and how cortisol impacts our hormones and um how can we have a balanced menstrual cycle if we're producing too much cortisol at the wrong time during the day, that type of thing. But it's also just how we talk about fertility in general.
Yeah, and you brought up a good point before we started recording. A lot of times couples have trouble conceiving and they assume that it's all on the female.
Yeah.
Or if the male is evaluated, it's not like a full evaluation like you and I would do in terms of
Yeah.
nutrition, environment, lifestyle, sleep, stress. Talk about things that men can do to optimize their wife or partner's chance of conception.
Yeah, there is so much that men can do. And I talk a lot about this in my course. So so let's just backtrack for a sec. The reason that there's so much that men can do is because men produce new sperm every single day, right? And so it has about a 75-day cycle for it to mature, and then it's about 15 days or so before it can be used. Let's say, so we're looking at about a 90-day window. So that means that you can actually do so much to create healthier sperm today that you can then use 90 days from now.
Right.
Whereas women, yes, we're born with all of our eggs, but there's a lot we can do before they mature and improve egg quality. But it might not be as drastic as what men can do to improve motility, morphology, sperm count, and the other parameters that you measure for sperm. So that's why I talk about it a lot in my course, is because I just really want to encourage men, like, you actually play a very big part in this. Like,
Right.
you play a very big part. And now the research is showing, I think it's about 30% of couples struggling with infertility, it's actually related to the men. So
Right.
it's no longer this woman's issue and men don't need to be involved. That's not the case anymore. And we see this with declining sperm counts across the globe, declining testosterone levels as well. And so when I was creating my course, I was like, okay, what can men do? Like, what does the research show that men can actually do on a daily basis, like simple, healthy habits? And a lot of it is probably very basic things that you would recommend to your clients, the people you work with as well. So things like avoiding alcohol, avoiding actually most recreational substances. So unfortunately, like cannabis as well. It's been proven to decrease testosterone levels, have a negative impact on your sperm. Um, Sticking to whole foods, no processed foods. There's certain supplements, exercising every single day. And a big one for men is watching the amount of heat and tightness around the testicles, because heat decreases sperm count. So you really want to choose like boxers. I guess boxers are the ones that are more loose, right?
Yeah.
So boxers, you want to be, if you can get a stand-up desk at work, that would be great, just to help with not sitting as much and not creating as much heat down there. There's other ways to reduce heat as well, like very specific things we could get into, but those are generally kind of the things that are easy for men to kind of do, but hard to stick to day in and day out.
There's something, yeah, you've heard of the biohacker. I think his name's Lucas Ioun. I don't know if it's Aoun. He's in
Maybe.
Australia,
Okay.
but he helped develop, it's called a primal cold pack for the testicles. And I have one. I can't believe I'm admitting to this. You
Nice.
take it out of the freezer about an hour before you plan on using it. Essentially, it's like a cup around that area. But the body keeps the testicles outside of the systemic body in order to keep them cool. So the cooler we can keep them, it can only help, right?
Exactly. That's spot on. So what I had my husband do is whenever he would go in the sauna or steam room during our cleanse, which again you have to be careful with because of the heat, I bought these boxers, they're called snowballs. And in the front where the testicles go, there are these ice packs that you put in there. And so we would be in this like public steam room and I would just look at him and he's like wearing his bathing suit and underneath is his boxers and there's ice in there keeping them cold so he can detoxify and sweat, but also watch the temperature of his testicles. So
Right. Have there been any studies or have you seen any studies showing that sauna use will decrease sperm count?
I don't know if it's sauna use exactly, but it's I think it's just overall heat in general.
Yeah.
And so that's why I just caution with saunas. So he did reduce how much he was doing during our preconception cleanse. And also things like no seat warmers in the car, being very mindful of that. And yeah, just any type of extra heat that could be there. Like, how do we reduce that?
And conversely, along the same lines, can cold plunges increase sperm count?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's been direct research on that, but obviously is a lot of research on the health benefits of cold plunging and cold exposure in general. But I don't know, it might be too nuanced for that type of direct research yet.
Yeah. And I imagine it's probably hard to get funding for something like that, even though it's,
Yeah.
it's an important thing because like reproductive medicine is such a huge moneymaker. And I'm not saying everyone in it is bad, but
Yeah.
if they're not talking to you about lifestyle and sleep and stress and nutrition,
Yeah.
then and they're just trying to do a procedure, well, why did you need that procedure in the first place?
Yeah.
And I'm not trying to shame people who need it, because there are some people I understand who legitimately need it. But if you're not sleeping but 5 hours a night and you're eating fast food 5 times a week or 4 times a week, there's no way you can be healthy to conceive.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was reading, I think it was published in the States. There was a study that came out about the advice that women get from their doctors before trying to conceive, and it was like 71% of women don't get any health advice. So nothing. So they'll go into the office and they'll say, "Oh, I want to have a baby." And the doctor will say, "Okay, like come back in 6 months or a year and let me know how it goes." There's no conversation on anything that you just mentioned. It's just like, "Yeah, go try." And oh, then if you have issues, then we can talk about IVF for your options. And it's like, no, let's take a more proactive approach, you know?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
And in terms of testing, lab testing, do you test the gut microbiome, toxicity levels, and hormone levels, thyroid, cortisol? What all do you look at?
Yeah, it's a good question. So I mean, you could test everything really, but I think a good place to start are the hormone levels, especially for women. You would want to do a full panel. I like working with the Dutch company, Dutch testing. They have some great testing that looks at all of the different metabolites that can go with hormones. So that's what I've
Mhm.
done for myself. And I also had my husband do a version as well, looking at his cortisol, testosterone, everything like that. Um, and then we also did, I also like to try and get the men to do a sperm test as well. You know, like let's get some sperm information if we can. And then a lot of women will also do the AMH test, which is it's not 100% accurate, but it can kind of indicate what your egg reserve is. And then we kind of know what you're working with. But at the same time, like it's helpful, but it can also be discouraging to women. So I don't know.
Right. And then in terms of gut microbiome,
Mm,
I remember reading, so I've worked with a fair number of kids on the autism spectrum, and
nice.
I came across a study over the past, well, it was about 10 years ago, that said that mothers who have high levels of gram-negative bacteria and they release lipopolysaccharides
Wow.
into the bloodstream, that can deplete glutathione from the baby's central nervous system, predisposing you to, autism and neurological issues. So the gut microbiome, it may not be directly involved, but indirectly it plays a huge role. And obviously, the healthier the mom is, the healthier the baby's going to be in general, right?
Wow, that is very fascinating. I would love for you to send me that information after this
Yeah,
because I'd love to read up on that. Yeah, I think it just goes back to this same point of how do we get both mom and dad to be as healthy as they can be prior to conceiving so that the baby is healthier. And that narrative, like that way of looking at it, is just not talked about very often at all.
right,
Um, even in the context of gut health, even in the context of, hey, like if you do these things, there's a potential you could reduce the chance of your kid getting autism. Like, wow, that's so impactful. That's
right,
so impactful. And this was my issue, a year and a half ago when I first started like looking at this was the way that we were approaching it was very like, you're having a fertility problem. Okay, here is this treatment or drug or whatever solution we're going to throw at you versus let's be proactive and preventative today so that we don't even open that door in the future. Like, what can I do for 3 months, 6 months so that I don't have any fertility issues or struggle to get pregnant, right? And everywhere I looked, it was like, let's solve the fertility problem rather than let's be super healthy right now and never have the problem in the first place.
right. Absolutely. And
Yeah.
I read, this was about 7 or 8 years ago, a study that looked at the umbilical cords of newborn babies, and they found that the average newborn had between 250 and 300 known carcinogens. And that was just the carcinogens, not other
Jeez.
things. And so, we're coming into the world today very toxic.
Yeah.
And I still hear traditional allopaths saying, well, we have detoxification systems. Well, yeah, I have a gas tank in my car too, but I can't drive from here to Canada without refilling it, right? Like there's a law of diminishing returns, and you got to support those systems because we're exposed to tens of thousands of environmental chemicals. And so, we know about phase 1 and phase 2 detoxification in the liver. Do you support that along with the lymphatic system when getting females ready to conceive?
Yeah, for sure. We definitely go through kind of all of the elimination, detoxification organs in general, and the role that they can play because like you said, you kind of have to. Like you can't just ignore that and act like we can go throughout society without thinking about how to detoxify more. And like I have seen a lot of very similar things said that you're talking about of people saying the liver detoxifies, like that's its job. Why do we have to help it? Why do we have to do these extra things? Like, detoxifying is a myth and all of these things. But at the same time, like you said, like our world is just so much more toxic today than it's ever been, than it's ever
Yeah,
been. So obviously, why would we not try to support the liver or the bowels or the gut or whatever it is? Like it just makes sense. And I think a big part, and I also talk about this, is how do we like one of the easiest things people can do is just reducing their exposure in their first place. So, yes, there's ways you can detoxify, but a great place to start is like, let's just reduce how much toxins you're first exposed to. So, things like personal care products, household products, choosing things that are clean and green and have ingredients that you could actually pronounce is just a fantastic place to start.
yeah. I just recorded an episode with Andy Nilo from Alatura Naturals,
Nice.
and
Yeah.
he said, with his products, they cost a lot more to make, but obviously, what goes on your body is going in your body. And, it's easy to make someone's skin look really good. It's much, much harder to make the skin look good and not be toxic.
Wow.
And,
Yeah.
to your point about the liver, so, if the liver is congested, so to speak, then that's going to lead to downstream hormone problems. Since, for example, with males and females, we have to methylate our estrogens before we can excrete them out of the body.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so that's why a lot of the time when you see women with hormonal imbalances, including myself when I was going through it, I was not in a place where I was living a very detoxifying life. I was drinking a lot of alcohol. It's not great. I was, my products were like clean, but not super clean. Living in a city, being exposed to pollution and all the plastics that were in my apartment, like all of these different places. And then you kind of wonder, oh, like, why is my menstrual cycle irregulated? Or like, why am I having these weird things going on? But the liver is so overburdened. How is it supposed to detoxify excess estrogen when there's so much else that it's just trying to keep up with?
Yeah, absolutely. And, the basic nutrients like the B vitamins, amino
Yeah.
acids, taurine, that go a long way. It doesn't have to be super, super fancy, but I'm a big fan of sustainable detox. Like, I think it's okay to take 6 to 8 months to detox intensely, but, you want to open your drainage pathways first, right? Or you can retoxify. And I think a lot of people jump to the more expensive interventions without addressing the basics because they're not as sexy, so to speak. But if we work on phase one and phase two liver detoxification, that's going to make you healthier. It's going to help your cognition, your gut health. You're going to digest and assimilate your nutrients better. And in terms of digestion, do you have specific probiotics or prebiotics or digestive enzymes that you recommend for women trying to conceive?
Yeah, I think there is some research on the different strains. I I mean, you can look very specific into it and look at the ones that can help. There's also research on the ones that are actually great during pregnancy. So when I was kind of creating my stack of supplements for pregnancy, I was looking into that. And I think it is important to acknowledge that, and I kind of list them in my course. But I also really just encourage people in general to incorporate more fermented foods into their diet. I I love supplements and they do have their place and they are needed for sure, but I also love a foods first approach of let's try to have something fermented every single day so that you're getting way more diversity of strains of bacteria and way more exposure than you would if you were going to take this same probiotic for 6 months that has these three strains in them. Um, and I think people are pretty surprised when they start to try to incorporate more fermented foods in their diet and they realize, oh, like I actually wasn't eating that much fermented food before.
Right.
Especially in North America, like it's not a daily thing.
Right.
I don't think so anyway. Yeah.
Yeah, and for guys, do you ever work with couples, working with the wife or female and the male?
It's not yet. A lot of the time, it's women who book in with me, and then they will ask questions about their partners. But
Right.
I would like to get to a point probably later this year where I am working with couples directly. But there tends to be more of a I was talking about this yesterday on a podcast. There tends to be more of a hump that men have to get over in order to talk to somebody about their health. And
Right.
whether that's because of society and the way wellness is viewed, it's probably because of that. But it's more challenging to get men to like care about self care for sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I've never really been one of those people. I mean, I haven't always been this into biohacking, obviously,
Yeah.
but I always just thought, hey, like, if there's an issue, if there's an opportunity to get out in front of something that could become much worse later, then why not? It might cost $300 now, it could cost 10,000, 2
Yeah.
years from now. So I think that's gradually starting to change. If you take better care of yourself, you can show up better in the world for your relationships, personally, professionally, sports you might play, your career, all those things. And so, we all perform at something. And so, performance medicine isn't just for athletes; it's for everyone, really. If you're a parent, like parents perform, right?
Yeah.
And talk about sleep for a minute because we know you won't once you have the baby for a while, you won't be getting as much sleep for a while. So, how do you approach sleep?
Yeah, yeah, that's not something I'm looking forward to. Yeah, especially because I have an Aura ring, so I'm gonna see all my
Oh yeah,
stats. every night. Oh boy. Yeah, sleep is pivotal. We sleep about one third of our entire lives, right? So when people overlook it, it's just kind of like, why don't you think it's important? And so I talk a lot about sleep and how to optimize your sleep environment. The very basic things that you've probably heard: blackout curtains, reducing blue light, using red light at night, not blue light. I do all of that. I just got a white noise machine, which has been phenomenal. But basically creating this environment where it's cold and dark and kind of like a cave, and you can sleep in there, and ideally you fall asleep quickly, you don't wake up very often, and then you can get enough hours that you need to feel restored. And that really does help with hormone balancing, and it really does help with our circadian rhythm and our cortisol rhythm as well. So it's really pivotal. And sometimes with clients it's tricky because they have some habits that we have to work on, like scrolling on their phone before they go to bed, and then they wonder why they can't fall asleep for an hour. But it's like you were exposed to so much blue light and stimulation, like so close to your face, for like how long? And then you're thinking about everything that you just looked at. So
Right.
how on earth are you gonna like fall asleep nicely and have a nice like solid 8 hours after that? So a lot of the time with sleep, it's like, let's biohack the environment and let's biohack your routine around it.
And do you have a chili topper?
I have the 8 sleep.
Okay,
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Have you noticed an increase in your deep sleep with that?
Uh oh, that's a good question. I don't know. I would have to look. I don't know if I've noticed an increase in my deep sleep. I've noticed that I wake up less throughout the night, which is saying something because I always have to wake up to use the bathroom now in third trimester.
Right.
So if I can wake up twice in one night, that is actually an accomplishment for me versus like 5 or 6 times. And so it definitely helps if I keep a little cooler to do that. Yeah.
Awesome. What advice do you have for men? Like, obviously, start with food and start with sleep and environment. But in terms of supplementation, like I've seen specific research on acetyl-L-carnitine improving sperm motility. Are there other things that guys can do from a
Yeah.
supplement standpoint?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are certain companies that are now producing blends of nutrients that are focused on sperm enhancement. And so one of my favorite ones is by a company called Needed, and it has a stack of nutrients in it, vitamins, minerals, and I think there's some herbs in there too, that are designed exactly for what we were talking about earlier of how to enhance your sperm health. So I like to put men on something like that. I think um, a multivitamin is just kind of like, I don't know, like a one a day is kind of like BS. Like it's not really going to do much. Like let's not even waste time doing that. Let's look at something that has the methylated B vitamins in it, the choline in it, that can really help support you in this way. Um, and then on top of that, definitely looking at omegas for sure. Most people are not getting enough omega-3s in their diet. Essential fatty acids, like how can we increase that? Whether you're going to eat more seafood, are you going to take a supplement? That is really important because we need more healthy fat for our hormones, for testosterone, which leads to all of the different cascades of things of like increasing libido, which can be an issue for men as well. Uh, so it depends on the person. It's great if we have testing done too. Um, but that's kind of like where I like to start.
What sort of omega-3 doses have you been taking during your pregnancy?
Oh my gosh, during my pregnancy. Oh, I'd have to look it up. I don't know. It's pretty significant. I would say, yeah, I would have to look up the exact numbers. I Yeah, I do follow it, but I also take Fatty 15. I don't know if you know what that is.
Mhm.
No. Okay. So Fatty 15 is a company. Basically, they found a new essential fatty acid. It's called C15, and it's the first new essential fatty acid found in the last 90 years since omega 3.
Wow.
And so I got exposed to them last year. and had them on my podcast, same thing. And they were just talking about how much it outweighs and how much it outperforms omega-3. So now pregnant, I'm kind of doing like one or the other. I'm doing both. You kind of have to be careful with taking new supplements when you're pregnant, uh, but I still take it. So we'll see. I don't think there'll be any issues, but that's kind of where I'm at. But I don't necessarily have specific numbers for you for the omegas that I'm taking right now.
Yeah, I think a lot of supplement companies, to cover their behind, they say, oh, well, do not take during pregnancy.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I mean, yeah, you can overdo it, and there's some things that are contraindicated, but you need the methylated B vitamins, you need the minerals, you need the omega-3 fatty acids and the C15 that I didn't know about.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, I'll also say I had my DNA tested a while ago. And this was one of the, like talking about testing, this is one of the best tests I did because they looked at my methylation and detoxification pathways. And they showed me that I'm not a great methylator. I'm like, I have about, I think it's like 50% of the variations that can lead to poorer or worse off methylation. And so when I started reading that and started actually looking at my DNA, that was when I was like, oh, yeah, it is actually super important for me to be taking methylated B vitamins because if I don't, I struggle to convert it. And a lot of people have those issues. They just might not know because they haven't done that sort of DNA testing.
did you do the DNA company?
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had Kashif on the show. He's a buddy of mine. I
Nice.
had a lot of Canadians on the show. Like, I had Natalie Nidham, um, you, Kashif, Sachin Patel. It was like a month of Canucks. But not one of them said A. I was expecting like, about those mitochondria, A, but I didn't get it. So I'm
Uh,
still hopeful for the future.
yeah,
But
that's funny.
when how have your macros changed essentially,
Mm.
and your nutritional template that you follow, from being single to being married and pregnant?
Yeah, good question. So pregnancy's been tough. It's been harder than I thought it was going to be in terms of sticking to as healthy of a diet as I would want. When I first trimester, I went through about 6 weeks of nausea, like all day nausea. And that was really mentally hard for me to accept. And when my stomach was empty, I would feel more sick. So I would just eat more, like eat more than I've ever eaten in my life, And but you feel sick, so you're not necessarily craving like a nice balanced like dinner plate, you know what I mean? Like I was eating like cereal and random processed foods that I could stomach. And it was really mentally tough to go through that. And so my macros at that time, ugh, terrible. Like probably I don't even know. Low fat, some protein, high carb, like typical American diet. Like it was really bad. Um, Thankfully that ended and second trimester was phenomenal and I didn't have any of that. And so I learned from that uh when you're feeling that sick, I would say that any food is better than no food. And because I was so healthy before that and so healthy afterwards, I'm not like gonna beat myself up about it. Um, and now in third trimester, I'm trying to do high fat, high protein, medium carbohydrate. But it's also tough now because I'm supposed to be eating more calories every single day than normal. And that
Right.
is hard as well. So trying to keep everything balanced and in mind, but also trying to nurture my body so that I'm not depriving it.
Right.
Uh, it's very different than not being pregnant. Oh my gosh, not being pregnant is so much easier.
Yeah, I mean, back in the day, I had a kidney stone, and I said, males don't give birth, but imagine if we did, this is what it would feel like. It was so painful.
Yeah.
But in terms of the birthing process, do you guys plan on doing a home birth or?
Yes. So we are planning for a home birth, which has been very eye opening to have to dig into birth. I've always known, okay, I would probably do a home birth, but until you get pregnant for the first time, you don't really like look into it. You don't listen to the podcasts. You don't become educated about it. But once I started learning about like the cascade of interventions and Pitocin and being induced and all of these things, I was like, oh, like that's not going to work with me. Like, I know this is not going to work. Like, it's not going to fly. So we have a midwife and we have a doula. And so we are fully planning to do a home birth. And I'm doing a lot of preparation for that. So hopefully it goes well, but we'll see.
Yeah, I mean, we've medicalized the whole birthing process. And I was reading
Yeah.
something a few days ago, and it said, think about it, your first experience, out of the mother's womb is a stranger grabbing you, cutting the umbilical cord, all these
Yep.
machines going off, people talking, 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 noise pollution, light pollution. And so it's not good, in my opinion. I mean, I understand there's some high risk pregnancies that may need to be in the hospital. But outside of that, I think, what you're doing is the way to go. And it can only help the baby's health long term, in my opinion.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, just being able to give the baby to mom right away, have the skin
Mhm,
to skin contact. There's so much research that looks at the bacteria actually that happens during that time.
mhm.
Coming out through the vaginal canal, babies are soaked in the healthy bacteria, healthy and probably non-healthy, but a balanced bacteria.
Mhm.
And then even when you put baby onto mom, like skin to skin, the baby is then exposed to all of the healthy bacteria on mom's skin as well. And so that bond is so, so important. And also so important for actually developing baby's microbiome.
Yeah,
Like versus taking the baby and the nurse like wipes the baby down right away and like takes the baby away and weighs the baby and does all of these things that can wait. Like doesn't need
yeah,
to happen right away.
right.
Let mom and baby have that golden hour where they get to bond, and I just think it's so important for your health, for the baby's health.
Absolutely. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think that, I mean, is going to create a more robust baby. And, long term, like you can make up for lack of breastfeeding and things like that, to an extent, but it's always better to err on the side of caution.
Yep.
I was breastfed and I like to think I'm pretty healthy, but, or excuse me, I was bottle or formula fed, not
Mm,
breastfed, and I was a C-section baby. But it also led to me being on a lot of antibiotics as a child, so, for the reasons you mentioned. And so I think, most people know about the gut microbiome, but there's the vaginal microbiome, the urinary tract microbiome, the skin microbiome. And so, do you have plans on supplementation if you have trouble breastfeeding and things that can help?
yeah. I mean, it's a good question. Yeah, I need to do more research into it now that I'm like prepared for birth. I need to prepare more for breastfeeding. I would like to solely breastfeed, but I will yeah, I'll pump and use a bottle and I'm fine with that. Some women like solely breastfeed, but in terms of supplementing on top of that, or if I can't breastfeed and I have to give them formula, it's gonna be a very hard pill for me to swallow if that is what I have to do. However, I understand that women, like things happen and women get sick, they have trouble breastfeeding, it's painful, there's mastitis, like there's all of these issues that can happen. And so I would, yeah, it's a really good question. I need to be prepared if that's my reality and like what can I do to mimic breastfeeding as best as I can. So yeah, something I have to look more into.
From what I've read, sunflower lecithin or phosphatidylcholine can
Hmm.
help women who have trouble, creating breast milk or getting it to flow properly. I'm sure there are many other things, but that's just one that
Yeah,
I've read about in the
nice.
past. Um, in terms of like this is looking, 2, 3 years down the road, but
Yeah.
what types of food? Obviously, your baby's going to be eating organic, non-GMO. But you and your husband, do you plan on allowing your son to have a popsicle or a cookie, things like that?
Yeah, so funny. My mom just asked me this question. Um, I think that I would love to do the first 2 years without sugar if possible. And people hear that and they think like, "Oh yeah, I did that. Like that's so easy." But sugar is actually in everything. And so you really have to look at the ingredients. Like you could be feeding your kid yogurt and you're like, "Oh yeah, I never give my kid sugar," but like that yogurt actually has sugar in it. So being very mindful of, okay, we're going to do unsweetened organic yogurt, grass fed if we can, raw, I don't know, whatever, all of these things if we can find it, and then add berries to it, right? Like, so just being very mindful of that. And so I think that'll be the approach for the first 2 years. Uh, After that, I I would like to stay as paleo as we can as a family, but I think my approach is going to be very educational. So I don't know, like, and I'm gonna have to do research on this so that I can make the best decisions. But I I would like my kid to understand, hey, like if you have this cookie and then you're upset and you have an energy crash an hour later, it's because of this cookie and what's in this cookie. And like, let's talk about that. And instead, if you choose something with like protein in it or healthy fat, like let's talk about how that works. And just like just talking to them about it is like something that I definitely did not grow up with. And so then ideally, I can empower them to make the best decisions for themselves. And so if they still choose the cookie, it's like, great, like go have the cookie, but like you understand what's in that. Like, you know, because I don't want to be a strict mom that's
Right.
like, no cookies. And then they go to their friend's house and then they're smashing cookies in their face all day.
Or they become, a teenager and they're, at school and they're just, ordering pizza, cakes and
Yeah.
Twinkies. And I think, there's a lot to be said for allowing some freedom and not being so strict in that regard.
Yeah.
Um, what's something you know today that you wish you would have known 10 to 12 years ago?
Oh, so much. Um, Damn. I wish I understood the uh impact of small daily healthy habits and how they can actually make a difference. And how sticking to like a simple list of like 5 things you do every day for your health, like simple as like drink more water, right? Like very simple, actually makes a very big difference in your health if you do it consecutively. I don't think
Right.
I knew that back then. I don't think I knew what creating some sort of daily stack or routine would actually do. And now that I've done it so many times in different ways, like even when I did 75 hard, like I did 75 hard 3 different times, like even learning through that, like, whoa, like doing these 5 habits every day for 75 days in a row. After 75 days, you're like, oh my gosh, like I don't even recognize who I was 3 months ago. Um, so I think just understanding the power of small, healthy decisions in general.
Absolutely. And where can people find you if they want to take your
Yeah.
course or work with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So my course is called Baby Steps. It's an online 7 week course. It's self-paced. It also includes the 90-day protocol that my clients have done and me and my husband did to get pregnant on the very first try. We actually tripled his sperm count before and after it as well, which was very
Awesome.
interesting. Yeah. And so you can go to babystepsmethod.com or my website, biohackingbrittany.com, and it's all linked to there. And yeah, biohacking Brittany everywhere on social media.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for the work that you're doing. Good luck with the rest of your pregnancy. And I
Thank you.
hope you have a very healthy birthing process.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Take care.